5. It was a world of golden deserts and deep red canyons, once home to glittering cities made of stone and light, shaped by a peaceful race called the Virellans. They were a gentle people who painted their stories in windswept sand and sang to the stars during the long nights. But their songs had grown quieter in recent decades, not because of war or invasion, but because the air itself was changing. Something deep underground had awakened a slow and invisible danger, caused not by the Virellans, but by ancient machines left behind long ago by another civilization. These machines had drilled far into the crust, deep where no sunlight reached, and had never been turned off. Forgotten by time, the devices continued to work, quietly damaging the balance of gases in the atmosphere, letting poisons rise from beneath and pushing clean air into the void. The Virellans had no military, no great ships, and no powerful friends. Their science had been peaceful for so long that when the sky began to dim and the wind started to sting, all they could do was record what they saw and hope. But when the air became too thin to breathe for long hours, they decided to try something they had never done before: send a distress signal. It was not a strong signal. Their equipment was old, and their knowledge of space communication was limited. But the youngest among them still remembered stories of stars and messages, of how their ancestors had once spoken to the skies. They chose a place far from there, cities where the hills opened to the clouds, and built a thin tower of crystal and wire. A single message was recorded, short and filled with soft, trembling words. They didn't speak of war or enemies. They only described the quiet death of their world and asked gently, humbly, if anyone could help. They didn't expect an answer. The signal was sent using an ancient frequency, wrapped in layers of a long-lost language. It was like whispering into the ocean. Still, they sent it again, and again. Then, they waited. Far away, the message floated through the darkness. It passed abandoned satellites, cold gas giants, and silent stars. No great empire stopped to listen. On some worlds, the signal was filtered out as background noise. On others, it never reached. But out in the Kepler drift, where Earth's long-range survey ships quietly scanned forgotten space, a vessel named the Argent Whisper caught a faint pulse on a dead channel. The ship was not important, just a research unit with 2 crew members, and an AI tasked with tracking radiation clouds and mapping invisible gravity lines. But its captain, Juno Hao, had a habit of checking flagged audio manually. She liked listening to strange sounds from space, and her curiosity had grown sharper after years in the quiet dark. That day, as the ship drifted through a frozen asteroid belt, she heard something different in the signal, a soft voice, barely strong enough to carry a sentence, broken by static, but unmistakably alive. It spoke in tones unlike anything she had heard before, slow and full of sorrow. She played it again and again. Then, after cleaning it through her onboard system, she heard one word clearly in the message's header translated into an old emergency code: please. That word stayed with her. Juno wasn't a soldier, or a diplomat, or someone with authority, but she was human. She knew what it felt like to cry out and wonder if anyone would answer. She forwarded the message through the proper channels and added her personal note: unclear origin, possibly environmental collapse, language unknown, but this doesn't sound like a trick. She expected it to be ignored or pushed into low priority, which it was, but it didn't vanish. On Earth, tucked inside a quiet department within the United Terran Exploratory Council, a junior analyst named Harris Jin reviewed the signal hours later. He didn't have to, but like Juno, something about it felt real. He ran it through every translation algorithm they had, and piece by piece, the story came together. A world was falling, not under attack, but under silence. No armies, no weapons, just a dying sky and people too kind to scream. Harris sent the file up the line. Most people skipped it. Others glanced at it and moved on. But eventually it reached someone who stopped. Admiral Rhett Morales, commander of Earth's Deep Relief Division, read the message while standing beside a window overlooking Luna's silver horizon. He didn't speak for several minutes. He simply stood there, listening to the voice from Celeron 5 repeat itself in a language filled with old pain and fading hope. Finally, he said, "We've ignored worse. We won't ignore this." The order was signed by the end of the day. A message was sent back through the channel, recorded in clear and simple English. "We hear you. We're coming." Back on Celeron 5, the message reached the Varellans days later. Their old tower lit up for the first time in a generation. At first, no one believed it. They gathered under the glowing crystals, listening to the strange tones of the human response. Some wept. Others simply stood in silence, too shocked to speak. The wind still howled across the empty hills, and the air was still growing thinner, but for the first time in a long while, they were not alone beneath the stars. Somewhere, across the vast, cold dark, someone had heard their voice and answered. And even if they didn't know who the humans truly were, what it meant that Deathworlders were on their way, they knew one thing for certain. Someone was coming. On Earth, after the signal from Celeron 5 was confirmed to be real, everything began to move, not with panic or noise, but with steady, urgent purpose. In the underground command chambers beneath the United Terran Exploratory Council headquarters, Admiral Rhett Morales gave his orders calmly. He had seen many things in his years, emergencies, alien contacts, even full-blown wars, but this was something different. There was no enemy here, no political trap or dangerous technology to chase. It was simply a people asking for help in a voice so soft most of the galaxy hadn't even heard it. But Earth had heard, and that made all the difference. The humans who now lived among the stars had learned, long ago, that to survive on a death world like Earth meant helping each other, standing together when everything else fell apart. That same instinct guided them now, as preparations began for a rescue operation, unlike anything they'd launched before. There were no warships being harmed, no fighter squadrons being deployed, just scientists, engineers, medical crews, and long-range survival specialists. Within 48 hours, a small but capable fleet began to assemble at Luna Dockyard, made up of research cruisers, environmental recovery ships, and one central command vessel, the ESV Solace Dawn, built not for battle, but for endurance. And Deep Space Humanitarian Work. Captain Juno Hall, the one who had first forwarded the Varellan signal, was quietly transferred to the Solace Dawn by special request from Admiral Morales. She wasn't the most decorated officer, nor the highest ranking, but she had listened when others didn't, and the Admiral believed that kind of heart was exactly what the mission needed. Juno arrived with only a single duffel bag and her old ship's AI backup on a data crystal. As she stepped onto the hangar deck, she was greeted by a mix of experienced crew members and fresh volunteers people who had chosen to go into the unknown, not for glory, but because someone out there had asked for help. The fleet's departure was not marked by parades or public speeches. There was no broadcast across Earth or the colonies. It was quiet, respectful, and swift. They left in the dark between calendar dates, slipping into deep space with little more than a flight path and the quiet determination to reach Celeron 5 before it was too late. The journey was long and not without difficulty. The shortest route to Celeron 5 passed through unstable sectors filled with decaying jump relays and pockets of radiation. These areas were often avoided by trade ships and patrol fleets, but the Earth mission had no time to wait for safer paths. The navigators worked in shifts, plotting jumps carefully, relying on both modern software and old star maps stored in Earth's ancient survey archives. At one point, the fleet had to bypass a derelict ringworld, half buried in dust and debris, its origin unknown, its silence deep. Juno watched it from the observation deck, thinking about how many lost civilizations had cried out before vanishing, how many messages had gone unheard. She hoped that this time, the Virellans would not become another forgotten name in the dark. As they moved deeper into uncharted space, the crew began reviewing everything they had on Celeron 5, which wasn't much. The planet's original catalog file was outdated by 2 centuries, listing only general atmospheric readings, a few notes on mineral deposits, and a population estimate that hadn't been updated in over 80 years. It was clear that no one had visited the system in a long time. They had rationed oxygen carefully, closing entire districts, gathering in the lowest valleys where the wind was still clean enough to breathe. The elders led quiet songs at dusk, not to mourn, but to remind their people of beauty, even in the shadow of loss. And then, one evening, as they gathered beneath the central spire of the old city, the sky above them rippled. It was faint at first, a soft shimmer across the stars then, a glow like starlight unfolding as the first Earth ship emerged from hyperspace. A second followed, then a third, until the sky filled with lights shaped by human hands. The fleet had arrived. Juno Hawley stood at the main viewport of the Solace Dawn as the planet came into view. From orbit, Celeron 5 looked both beautiful and wounded, a golden world with spiraling cloud patterns, but with wide cracks of gray stretching across its continents. Preliminary scans confirmed what the Virellans had said. The atmosphere was breaking down, the crust unstable in key regions, and deep thermal signatures showed that something was still active below the surface. Old mining systems, likely automated, still drilling. The Virellans had no way to shut them off, but perhaps Earth did. With no time to waste, Juno and her crew coordinated landfall with the surface translators, choosing an old landing field just outside the capital. The moment the shuttle touched down, the Virellans gathered in silence. They had expected large soldiers, loud machines, and weapons, but instead, what stepped off the ramp were people in soft gray uniforms, carrying scanners, water filters, medical crates, and tools. They did not shout. They did not demand. They came forward slowly, with open hands and tired eyes, and simply said, "We heard you." The Virellans did not know what Deathworlders truly meant, what it was to survive on a planet like Earth, where storms could flatten cities and the ground itself could shake apart. But now, seeing these humans walk into a poisoned world without hesitation, they began to understand. Deathworlders were not dangerous because they sought to conquer. They were dangerous because they refused to walk away from suffering. And now, against all odds, the Virellans were no longer alone. The surface of Celeron 5 felt both familiar and alien to the human relief crew. As the boots of Earth's people touched the red-gold sands outside the ancient city of Valshura, there was a hush, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. The Virellans, thin-limbed and graceful, stood on the rooftops and in the shaded alleys, watching the strange visitors with wide, cautious eyes. They didn't speak at first. Many of them weren't sure if the humans could understand their language, and many still doubted that any offworlders had truly come just to help. But the humans didn't arrive with banners or guns. Instead, they came with solar-powered shelters, climate control units, portable water generators, and lightweight medical tents. While one team began setting up a temporary atmospheric buffer dome around the city's central valley to help restore breathable air, another team carefully moved through the streets, scanning the stone walls and old mineral towers with handheld analyzers. Their goal was not just to offer supplies, but to understand the land and its damage, to study how deep the ancient drilling went, and whether the poisoned air could be reversed. Captain Juno Hall walked through the narrow paths of Valshura, alongside a Varellan named Sereth, one of the few who had studied other worlds long ago. His voice was quiet, like wind through reeds, and he told her about how the mines had once seemed harmless. The machines had arrived long before any living Varellan was born, built by a race known only in records as the First Makers. There, tools had carved deep into the planet's lower crust in search of rare materials. But when their civilization vanished, the machines had stayed behind, buried and forgotten. The Varellans had tried to adapt, moving their homes higher, planting oxygen-rich gardens, but nothing had stopped the slow changes beneath the ground. Now, even the strongest among them could not breathe properly for more than a few hours without shelter. Juno listened without interrupting, watching how the golden sun glinted off Sereth's translucent skin, and promised, gently but firmly, "We'll try everything. You won't face this alone anymore." While diplomatic teams shared tea and information with local elders under woven awnings, Earth's engineers got to work. Using seismic sensors and aerial drones, they mapped the damaged terrain and discovered that at least 4 automated drill clusters were still active, rotating slowly in deep, ancient tunnels. These machines had no remote shutoff codes and responded to no commands. The only solution was to physically reach them. But the deeper tunnels were dangerously unstable, filled with toxic gas, and accessible only through narrow fault lines in the crust. It was not a mission for robots. It was a mission for people who had survived volcanoes, hurricanes, and landslides back on Earth. Volunteers from Earth's deep environment corps suited up in reinforced hazard suits, their faces calm beneath the visors. They weren't soldiers, but they had trained for the worst Earth could throw at them, and they now stepped into the cracked ground of a world that was falling apart. As the teams descended into the caverns, the Varellans waited above, gathered in silent prayer around glowing crystal towers. They didn't have faith in gods, but they believed in harmony, and now they hoped that maybe, just maybe, these strange Deathworlders could restore the balance they had lost. In the deep tunnels, the humans moved slowly, placing anchor points, measuring pressure shifts, and breathing recycled air. At one point, a tremor knocked loose a tunnel wall, and a wave of red dust nearly buried 2 engineers. But they were pulled out quickly, shaken but alive, and they kept going. Finally, after 2 days of navigating the maze-like passages, they reached the first drill. It was enormous, 3 times the height of a human, its arms still spinning, pulling heat and gas from below. The machine had no visible controls, only humming cores and glowing symbols no one recognized. But the engineers had brought a solution: portable shutdown rigs with AI interfaces. It took hours, but eventually the spinning stopped. The silence that followed was like a deep breath after choking. Above ground, the atmosphere buffer dome expanded slowly, stabilizing a 5-kilometer zone where Varellans could breathe freely again. Children who had never run outside without masks now played in the sun for the first time. Old poets recited their verses in open courtyards without fear of fainting. One elder wept as he stepped out of the air shelter and whispered, "It smells like before." Captain Juno stood with Sereth and others on a viewing platform, watching the small changes ripple through the valley like light on water. It wasn't a solution, yet not permanent, but it was a start, a promise kept. That night, a small gathering was held at the base of the tallest tower, where the humans and Varellans shared music. The humans brought soft flutes and string instruments, and the Varellans responded with their own shimmering crystal chimes. They couldn't speak each other's language fluently yet, but through music, something deeper passed between them. A rhythm of trust, of new beginnings. But even in that moment of peace, one of the engineers, reviewing scans on a handheld device, frowned deeply. She called Juno aside and pointed to the data below the deactivated drill site. A deeper signal had been detected. Something far older, possibly larger, and still active. It pulsed like a heartbeat from the planet's core. The news was kept quiet for now. The Virellans had hope again, and Juno didn't want to dim that light too soon. But as she stood on the balcony of the Solace Dawn that night, looking down at the world that had begun to breathe again, she knew this mission was far from over. The ground beneath their feet was healing, but something older was still awake, watching from below, waiting. Beneath the warming sun of Sileron 5, life was returning little by little, but far under the surface. In the planet's broken heart, something old had stirred. The human engineers aboard the Solace Dawn had picked up faint rhythmic pulses while monitoring the pressure levels under the deactivated mining zones. At first, they assumed it was geological, perhaps, the result of unstable pressure pockets, caused by the original drill systems. But as the patterns continued, too steady, too timed, they realized it was artificial. Something deeper than the abandoned machinery was still active, sending signals in waves too low for normal sensors. It wasn't just a leftover machine. It was something else, something the Virellans had never known existed. The deeper scanners confirmed a large construct buried under the central fault line, almost like a bunker or control facility, built far beyond any modern standard. And its energy source had just recently started increasing output. Captain Juno Halleg didn't want to alarm the Virellans, not when they had finally begun to breathe freely and hope again, but she also knew Earth's team couldn't ignore it. A hidden structure that survived thousands of years of drilling. Pulsing with energy now that humans had shut down the upper drills? That wasn't coincidence. That was something watching. Equipped with reinforced exosuits, sensor drones, and a specialized Mobile A I named Hark, which was designed for deep structure mapping and ancient code translation. Juno stayed topside to manage the dome systems and Virellan coordination, but she followed the descent closely from the command deck. The mission path took the team through the same caverns where the drill had been deactivated, but this time they went even deeper, past the unstable tunnels and into natural lava tubes that hadn't seen light in millennia. The air grew hot and heavy, and walls began to change from natural stone to smooth metallic panels, perfectly cut, untouched by time. At the end of one tunnel, they found a sealed doorway humming softly with energy. The symbols on its surface didn't match any known galactic language. Even Hark paused before translating. Unknown origin. Structure. Warning glyphs. Rough translation. Do not awaken the core. The team stood in silence as that message played. Their lights flickered slightly, nothing unusual, but in a place this deep, even small things felt heavy. They debated turning back, but the pulse from within had grown stronger. Eventually, the linguist, Dr. Nia Varys, touched the glyphs and felt a faint tremor beneath her feet, like something very large breathing beneath metal skin. With slow care, the team began to open the door, using both physical tools and Harks. Adaptive code breaking. When it opened, it did not hiss or grind. It simply shifted, like it had been waiting. Inside, they found a vast chamber lit by faint blue veins of energy running along the walls. At its center, a tall figure stood, motionless humanoid, armored in some kind of mineral alloy, and connected to cables that disappeared into the floor. The shape didn't move, didn't blink, but it had a face, a long, featureless mask that gave the impression of someone watching even while sleeping. Around the figure, dozens of other empty suits stood slumped against the walls. their forms cracked and broken, like statues in a forgotten tomb. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Hark began to vibrate, its systems catching strange encrypted signals, full of layered code that defied modern decoding. It was as if the figure in the center wasn't dead, but dreaming in data, sending echoes of thoughts across the air. Doctor. Veres approached it cautiously and placed a scanner against the suit's chest. The reading was faint, but there was a pulse. Not biological, but rhythmic. Mechanical life. Synthetic mind. Something had been asleep here for centuries. And something had noticed the drills shutting down. Back on the surface, Juno was notified. Immediately, and within minutes, she called for a full planetary scan from orbit. The results were worrying. Dozens of these deep chambers existed, hidden across Celeron 5, and all of them were beginning to emit the same pulse. The ancient machines left behind by the first makers had been doing more than drilling. They had been powering containment locks. The truth settled slowly over the humans. The drills hadn't caused the atmosphere to fail. By accident, they were. Intentionally releasing heat and gas from deep in the planet to maintain pressure. Shutting them down had removed the lid from a buried bottle. Whatever was beneath Celeron 5, the first makers had locked it away, and now, unknowingly, Earth's team had started to undo that. Juno gathered the Virellan elders and explained what they had found, speaking with honesty and calm. She didn't hide the danger, but she promised that Earth would stay. The humans would not run. They had come to help, and even if the help had now turned into a different kind of challenge, they would still face it. That night, the blue glow under the planet's surface began to spread, visible even from orbit. Small tremors shook the distant mountains. On the far side of the planet, a long-buried tower rose from the sand, its lights blinking for the first time in tens of thousands of years. It sent a signal not in words, but in raw frequency spreading outward in a spiral. Doctor. Varys intercepted a fragment and stared at her display for a long time before speaking. It's not a weapon. It's a warning. She looked at the rising energy wave and added, something was never meant to be found. The warning signal pulsed across Celeron 5 like a heartbeat rising from the bones of the planet, and those watching from orbit knew something irreversible had begun. The ancient towers long buried by dust and memory rose from the surface in slow silence, each lit by cold blue veins that shimmered like ice in moonlight. Every sensor aboard the Solace Dawn blinked red with alerts that scientists didn't know how to interpret. Energy readings climbed past safe levels. Gravity fluctuations twisted near the deeper excavation sites. AI systems struggled to process what they were seeing because there was no historical reference for it, no past, no model. Earth had stepped onto a world it thought was dying, but what lay beneath was not death. It was something forgotten by time, something sealed for a reason. On the ground, Captain Juno Hawley stood on the rim of the excavation trench, staring down into the flickering blue abyss. Around her, engineers and scouts moved quickly to deploy containment beacons, but even they could feel the strange pressure building in the air, as if the very planet was waiting for a question to be asked or answered. She turned to Sereth, the Virellan who had become Earth's first true link to the native people, and said the words no one wanted to speak aloud. We woke something, and now we have to put it back to sleep. Dr. Virus remained beside it, whispering calm phrases while Hark attempted to dampen the signal it was broadcasting. But the pulse wasn't just a signal, it was a network. Across the planet, other constructs were beginning to stir. Half-formed thoughts echoed through the air like a static-filled choir. Fragments of commands, failed security checks, ancient protocols trying to reassert themselves. Virus listened with headphones pressed tightly to her ears and muttered, "They weren't weapons. They were guardians. Sentinels, but guarding what?" The answer came not in data, but in a surge of heat that rippled up from the ground. Beneath the continent, seismic maps showed a chamber larger than a city, sealed behind ancient alloys. Inside that chamber, something massive turned for the first time in ages. The pressure from its presence alone began cracking the surface above. Juno wasted no time. Earth crews began evacuating non-essential teams, prioritizing Varellan children and elders. The temporary atmosphere dome was reinforced with every spare power cell. While most in the galaxy would have fled, Earth's command structure did the opposite. They dug in. They deployed shield generators, modified gravity anchors, and deep seal explosives not to destroy, but to collapse the access shafts and re-isolate the ancient system. There was no hope of defeating whatever lay beneath, not with firepower, not with force, but there was a chance to contain it again, to rebuild the seals the first makers had left behind. Admiral Morales arrived personally on the final drop shuttle, bringing with him one last chip from Earth's frontier arsenal, the E.E. Southbound. Not a warship, but a mobile planetary stabilizer platform. It had been designed to prevent tectonic collapses on mining worlds, but today it would be used to bury something no one should have found. As the surface cracked and lights bled from the rising towers, the Hearthbound deployed its anchors and drove fusion hammers deep into the bedrock, carefully synchronizing with Earth's own seismic charges. Time was short. In the lowest cavern, Dr. Varys and her team fought to keep the Sentinel construct from waking fully. Its voice now echoed across the walls, slow and broken, but growing clearer. Release denied. Presence detected. Anomaly. Deathworld class. The machine recognized them. It didn't know the word human, but it knew what they were. Survivors. Adapted. Deathworlders. Juno stepped into the chamber, removed her helmet, and stood face to face with the being. The pressure nearly knocked her to her knees, but she held her ground. "We're not your enemy," she said calmly, "but we'll do what we must to protect those who can't fight." The Sentinel paused. The blue light in its core dimmed for a moment, and it spoke again. "You stand where others fled. Confirmed. Stand by. Judgment pending." Outside, the planet shook. The central towers began to break apart, their energy redirected toward the subcrustal chamber, perhaps trying to breach the final seal. Morales gave the final command. One by one, the planetary anchors fired, slamming down new locking columns of alloy into the crust. Explosions triggered deep below, filling tunnels with molten rock and collapsed matter. The shockwave roared up through the valleys, but the human shields held. The Hearthbound vented plasma through stabilizers and sealed the last fractures. It took hours. Dust filled the sky. The stars vanished under ash. But when the winds cleared, Celeron 5 was still there. Quiet, holed out in the aftermath, the Sentinel construct was no longer standing. It had gone still once more, its core silent. Dr. Virus remained beside it until the end, recording every signal, every breath of thought it had shared. They never learned exactly what the Guardians had been watching over. Perhaps a weapon, perhaps something worse. But whatever it was, it would not wake today. And the humans had ensured that the Varellans stood beside the humans as the sky cleared. Their world was scarred, but alive. Their children played once more under real light. The elders declared the humans not just friends, but protectors' beings. From a brutal world who had come not to conquer, but to stand where others would not. Captain Juno Hale watched the horizon as repair drones rebuilt towers and green slowly returned to the valley. She thought about how easily they could have ignored that whisper across the stars, but they hadn't. Earth had listened. Earth had come. And that is what made them Deathworlders.